Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Audrey Rindlisbacher, excited to have you here with me today. Over the past couple months, we've talked about the concept of creating. It's a really important idea that we go into in detail in my Mom's Academy and Teen Academies. But the fundamental idea there is that we are not victims, we are creators. And we have the ability to create wonderful, beautiful things. Look around you. We can take what's been given to us in the world around us and we can make amazing, wonderful things. And there's, we're creating all the time. We're creating chicken soup. We're creating a model of a car. We're creating a floor plan, whatever it is that we're creating. And we can also be creators in our relationships, our relationship with God, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with the people around us. And when we decide that we're going to be creators, things go a lot more smoothly when we decide we're going to be victims. And if you didn't get to hear my interview with David Emerald on this topic, I would go back and listen to that one. So fascinating, some really good insights there. If you want to dig deeper into these concepts, I would encourage you to get into the Mission Driven Mom Academy and take advantage of that opportunity. In the meantime, I want to talk to you about one of the aspects of being a creator that's tied up with the concept of self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence, all these little hyphenated, self-hyphenated concepts that we talk about so much. Because self-esteem, the concept, is not what it's cracked up to be. It is a lie that's actually holding you back, even though on its surface it seems like a super great idea. And I'm going to talk to you about some really important insights. I hope I can do it justice because it's something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, something that really kind of blew my mind the first time I was reading some of the stuff. And it's been super duper helpful for me. And I'll share some other little anecdotes and experiences from my life around this idea. Before I get into that, I just want to encourage you to like and subscribe, to leave a review, and to share out this podcast so that we can grow it and share how truth makes us free with as many people as possible. Today, we're going to talk about the truth of self-esteem and the truth of you as a creator and some kind of a key principle around this that you would never ever think to be a principle, but actually, when we think about it, Jesus taught it. So I'm gonna give you some construction of this idea, and I'm gonna give you an example so that hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, the thing that Robert Fritz explains is that most of us, what we do in life is that we create an ideal for ourselves. We think up who we would like to be or who we want to be. This can be something that's adopted from people around us, it's adopted from the culture, or we come up with it ourselves, or we see something in ourselves that we don't like or a weakness that we have, and so we decide that the ideal is to be the opposite of that. One of the things that it reminds me of is in StrengthsFinder 2.0, which is one of the self-discovery activities that we do in the academies, they have this really awesome example, and it really resonated with me the first time that I read it because the movie Rudy was just a huge family favorite. It was my husband's favorite movie. We owned the VHS back in the day and then the DVD, and it was something that we saw over and over and over again. And at the beginning of this book, it actually talks about how because Rudy was focused on compensating for his weakness, because he spent all of his energy trying to be a football player when he wasn't naturally a good football player, it's an inspiring story in the sense of overcoming and accomplishing things people tell you you can't do. But the point that they make is think of how far he could have gone had he been working with his strengths instead of against his weaknesses. And it's kind of that kind of idea that the ideal is often in response to a weakness that we see in ourselves or a certain way that we don't want to be or a way that the people around us have told us we shouldn't be. And then what we notice is that we don't meet our own ideal. We don't rise to the ideal that we've set for ourselves. We're not as good, as smart, as beautiful, as accomplished, as loving, as talented as our ideal says that we should be. And what happens, according to Fritz, is that we create an ideal reality conflict. We build, this is something that we just do. And one of the reasons I think it is part of human nature to do this, I think we naturally do it, but I think that all of this self-confidence, self-esteem, this movement has exacerbated. It's blown it wide open. And in a lot of the self-help spaces, we're given information that is not helpful. Okay, so we have this ideal reality conflict. And what happens then is that there's this ideal that you really want to get to and that you're not getting to it. And so everything that you do gets measured against the ideal. And you're constantly trying to accomplish this ideal. So any choice that you make is measured against this. In other words, in this model, success means that you are a success and failure means that you are a failure. Okay. So because your identity is all wrapped up in trying to accomplish your ideal, because your ideal becomes the measure of your life, and it either reflects other people's goals for us or it's a compensation for our own inadequacies that we suspect that we have. So we've set this up so that we can compensate for all the ways that we think that we're bad. Like, somebody told you that you were impatient or you tend to fly off the handle a lot. And so you think that you're a really impatient person. And so you set up this ideal of you that you need to be really patient. And that if you do a patient thing, then you are patient. And if you don't do a patient thing, then you are not patient. And on its surface right now, I know the way that I'm talking about it, it sounds like a good idea, but I'm going to show you why it's not a good idea. So what happens is that all your motivations become distorted and you stop being patient because it's a good thing to do, or you stop doing intelligent things because they're good things to do. Your true motivation is to eliminate your inadequacies, is to make you feel better about yourself, is to compensate for where you think you're wrong. And that creating this perfect ideal, you think that you're engaging in the creative process, but you're not. You think that you're creating a more ideal version of yourself. He says, the ideal is meant to be a solution to what you assume to be a problem, your current inadequacies. So I want to read you something here. He says, when you impose desirable qualities, admirable attributes, and high standards of accomplishment on yourself, and then attempt to force yourself into living up to these characteristics, you are implying through the act of forcing yourself that you are not fine just the way you are. The further implication is that there is something wrong with how you are. Okay, now, for all of us that want to grow and want to reach our potential and want to beat down this culture-wide thing of just accept yourself as you are, don't misunderstand. This is, I'm going to get to that in a minute, that this is not about we're not going to engage in growth. That is not about accepting ourselves as we are. And frankly, this is what I think, because the self-esteem movement really took off in the 80s. And we'll talk about this more, a little bit of the history and about what was going on then. And I think what we see happening now, this radical self-acceptance, is everything that you are is totally fine and you don't need to change one iota. is the backlash of that. I think it's that societally, over 30 years, 40 years, we have watched people play out that paradigm that they were taught, watch that it doesn't really work, feel even more miserable, and then backlash with, well, then I'm perfectly okay just as I am, and I don't need to change anything. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example so you have some idea kind of what this is all about, how this works. Chloe Cole is a really famous detransitioner. Okay. So when she was 12, well, okay, earlier than that, when she was younger, she was a tomboy and she loved being with the boys and playing with the boys. And it kind of made her feel good when people were like, oh, you're such a boy, because she saw the boys as, stronger and faster and more capable. But she didn't want to be a boy. In fact, what happened to her as she grew into she started maturing at 9 and 10 years old, she started going through puberty really early. And as puberty progressed, then at 11, she got a phone and she got on socials. And what was happening to her was that without realizing it, from what she drew from conversations around her, one of the comments that she made was that she never heard women talk positively about being a woman or about being a mother or about being pregnant or that kind of thing. And then she saw all these images, right? She saw them in the media, and then she really saw them when she had her own social media. And these images portrayed and I think she used the word voluptuous women. They were really well endowed and really curvy. And so for her, she created an ideal that was in contrast to where she was in her life. She created an ideal reality conflict for herself because she set up an ideal of what she was going to look like and be like when she went through puberty and developed. And then she started developing. And by the time she was 12 years old, having been gone, now puberty is full blown for some of her friends. They're developing. And she's starting to see, I'm never going to meet my ideal. Like, this is literally out of my control. I guess she could have had surgeries. She could have had breast augmentation, things like that. But in her 12-year-old mind, she had developed and she was lanky and skinny and pretty flat chested. And she did not look anything like the ideal that had been manufactured by society and that she had participated in constructing for herself. And so there was this ideal reality conflict. And when you have an ideal reality conflict, it creates tension. And the bigger the difference between the ideal and the reality, the more that tension grows and grows and grows, the harder it is to maintain the tension. And so at some point along the road, for a lot of people, they end up giving up, usually on the ideal, because most people don't completely give up on reality. They give up on the ideal. And for many people, they just throw in the towel. They say, well, I tried like crazy to measure up to that, and I'm never going to measure up to that. So I'm throwing in the towel, and I'm not going to have an ideal anymore. I'm not going to try to achieve or be anything really at all. So for Chloe, she had this ideal reality conflict. It became more and more and more painful. And now these other girls are developing. She feels lost in it. She gets to the point where, without better information, she becomes convinced that she will never be able to meet her ideal. It has become completely impossible for her. And so instead of doing what we're going to talk about that she could have done to deal with that, she decided that she wanted to be a boy. And social media contributed to that. And so she got into these social media spaces. She saw people gaining all kinds of acceptance and social points. And she saw that she was never going to reach her ideal. And so she gave up on it. And sadly, in her case, her parents went along with it. They just trusted the professionals. They fast-tracked her. They put her on blockers by 13, and she had a double mastectomy at 15 years old. And then by 18, she wanted to be a woman again. And she realized that she did have a desire for a family, and she did have a desire to have children. And so this ideal reality conflict can be incredibly painful and incredibly destructive. And what society was telling her was, if you don't feel right about yourself, if you don't like yourself the way you are, then something's got to radically change. You can't progress. You can't grow. You can't change. You can't create. You can't have the life you want to have because you can't meet your ideal. So the ideal distorts for good or ill, and it's all about the beliefs we hold about ourselves. And so you can think about Chloe and how she had this ideal that she was holding for herself. The reason that we do that is because we're dealing with an unwanted belief. Now, another place that this really is manifest is in the religious space. So what happens to people is that they grow up on religion and they get to a point in their life where, because they haven't had true conversion, or they don't really understand the tenets of their religion properly and how grace and faith and all those other things work to make up the difference between the ideal and reality, they 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 don't feel good about themselves. And so when they don't feel good about themselves, then they look around and they think, okay, well, it's because religion has shoved this ideal down my throat. And I'm never going to live up to that ideal. I've never lived up to it. This is miserable to try. So I'm going to throw in the towel. I'm going to alleviate the overwhelm, the stress, this ideal reality conflict that I feel by just throwing away religion and deciding that I'm going to lessen the tension and the pain that I'm experiencing by lessening the ideal, by lowering the standards. And what's interesting about this is that it doesn't bring good long-term results. It's not a good long-term solution, because actually the religion was not the source of the ideals, and it was not the source of the conflict. And our wrong ideal was the source. And so lowering the standards never elevates us. You throw away religion because you think it has oppressive standards. That's building this ideal that's causing you low self-esteem. But what you find over time, if you leave that behind, is that you can't actually progress in life without some standards. And you have to continue to raise your standards if you want to continue to grow. And all that religion has done is hold up the best standards that you could hold. And so the ideal reality conflict was not manufactured by the religion, it was manufactured by you. So what's happening in this ideal reality conflict is that we hold certain beliefs about ourselves. And we can't live up to these beliefs. And so we try to behave our way into this ideal. The example that he gives in the book over and over and over again is being good. There's a woman who believes that she's bad and she wants to be good. And so she believes that if she does enough good deeds, that it will make her good. But your actions don't make you good, right? She's not going to turn from good to bad because she did some good things. And this is what's so fascinating about this ideal reality conflict, is that it becomes this feedback loop. So when the really good example that he gives that you probably really relate to is affirmations. Everybody who's anybody in the self-help world will tell you that you need to do affirmations. The problem is that when you put all these pictures on your wall and you tell yourself that you're skinny when you know you're not, you're subconsciously, part of you, you're not stupid. And your mind realizes that only a fat person or an overweight person would put a thin person on the wall and tell themselves that they're thin. And so it reinforces the belief about yourself that you don't like. By trying to affirm to yourself, you're actually beating yourself up. And I actually thought of this years ago. So I kind of had an intuition a little bit along this line. And then when I read it from Fritz, I was like, that's what I was trying. That's what I was seeing. That's what I was trying to articulate. That's why I focus so heavily on true statements and not affirmations. The affirmations in this ideal reality belief conflict are a feedback loop that reinforces the thing about you that you don't want to be. He says that motivation tells the whole story. When you're doing the thing to get others' approval, to try to disprove your poor self-image, to try to fix something about you that you don't like, then it's this constant feedback loop that keeps telling you, but you're doing this because you have to keep doing this because you're bad. You have to keep doing this because you're dumb. You have to keep doing this because you're ugly or fat or whatever the things are that you're believing about yourself. And you're trying to beat it off by holding up an ideal and doing these affirmations. And it's this negative feedback loop that doesn't help, because good deeds don't equal goodness, and intelligent work doesn't equal intelligence. You can't work your way into it. You can't change your beliefs, because every time you do something that's motivated by fixing your wrong belief, it reinforces the wrong belief in you. You're constantly telling yourself, I would only be doing this if I believed this about myself. And when you don't live up to the ideal, then you incorporate some strategies. So self-admonishment is a big strategy that especially a lot of women use when they don't live up to their ideal. And that ideal is probably like kids that always obey, and a house that's perfectly clean, and you never raise your voice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you've adopted these from the culture, or you've created them for yourself. You've created an ideal that you have to rise to, that you have to be. And when you don't show up for that, when you know you fall short, then you engage in this beating yourself up. And you do it to deter the behavior. And it's this horrible, vicious cycle, because ideals often start out with, if I was a good mom, fill in the blank. Well, you have an ideal because that's your phrasing. If I was a good mom, my kids would always obey. If I was a good mom, the house would be clean. If I was a good mom, I would feel satisfied and fulfilled every minute of the day. And when you don't meet that ideal, then you beat yourself up. And then you realize that you shouldn't beat yourself up. So you beat yourself up for beating yourself up. Sound familiar? I got my hand raised because I've done it so many times. And, for a long time, I held, and I've kind of alluded to this a little bit on the podcast in the past, but it was just so profound for me. And there's so many things that I'm unpacking over time and learning about the nature of, how this all works for myself, because I created an ideal, an equation that was, if I check certain boxes and do certain things, then my children will turn out a certain way that I think that they ought to. And they'll make certain choices that I want them to make. And who am I to dictate what they're, but I didn't think about it that way at the time. I just thought that's how this works, right? That's how this works, is I live up to the ideal, and then they live up to the ideal, and then we have the ideal family. And I was doing myself and my children a huge disservice all the years that I was holding us all hostage to my ideal. And I'm going to get into this in just a minute. This does not mean we don't grow and progress. This does not mean we don't have goals and aspirations. Ideals are not goals and aspirations. Ideals are China dolls. They're fragile. They sit on shelves. They can't be tampered with, or they break, because they are created inherently to fix problems and to try to force ourselves into being a way that we think we ought to be. Another destructive way that we deal with ideals is going and getting therapeutic help. But this is rarely helpful, because the therapist doesn't understand that you're caught up in an ideal reality conflict that you're continually reinforcing. And you can go a long time talking to a therapist before anybody recognizes that you're just caught up in this loop. Why? Because any attempt to change the belief reinforces the belief. Anytime I try to affirm to myself that I am not overweight, that I don't ever yell at my kids, that my house is perfectly clean all the time, anytime I set an ideal or I speak that language or I hold myself to that standard, I constantly fall short. It's it's a constant feedback loop that I am less than, that I can't do it, that I'm not showing up, that I'm not who I should be. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually keeping my relationship with myself at a low because I'm less likely to care for myself if I'm focused on my brokenness all the time. Because this ideal reality belief conflict is really, you think that you're focused on the ideal. Chloe thought that she was focused on the ideal, but she was really actually just focused on the problem. And when we get into TED, the power of TED, and when we get into more about that, there'll be things coming in the future around being creators. We have some stuff in the works in the next year so that we're going to be bringing out. And as we get deeper into that, you'll see more and more how all these ways of being are problem focused and we need to be solution focused. And there's simple tools for flipping that switch. Another way that we try to live up, another strategy we use in trying to manage this ideal scenario that we've created for ourselves is, like I said, with religion, to throw it all away, just to abandon it. And that's what Chloe did. She had an ideal. She decided there was no way that she could reach it. And instead of doing a couple of the things that we'll talk about that she could have done instead, she threw it all away. She abandoned her womanhood in favor of trying to become a man. And of course, that did not work out at all. And so you throw it away because you think, well, every time I set a goal, every time I do an affirmation, every time I try to make plans, I just feel worse about myself. And it's true because you are reinforcing something that you feel is deficient in yourself and trying to fix it. So let's go back in time a little bit. David Hume was kind of one of the first people to start saying, and now this isn't to say that some threads and pieces of this could be found in ancient literature as well. The same ideas, recycle and recycle and recycle. But in modern times, David Hume was kind of the one that's pretty famous for basically saying, we have to think well of ourselves in order to meet our potential. Like, he's kind of the first one that really created an equation that in order to accomplish things, in order to be a creator, in order to show up for ourselves and our family and our loved ones, in order to set goals and accomplish them, we have to like ourselves. He equated those two things. Then William James came in and built on that and built out the 4 parts of the self and all of this kind of thing. There's some Marxism in there, some Freudian is in there of these big influencers. But the big guy was Morris Rosenberg in the 60s. And he put the concept of self-esteem, he kind of put it on the map. And he created a self-esteem scale. And actually, in the 80s, this got handed out in the schools. And in fact, some of the things that it would say, just to give you a sense of, it says, the sheets would say things like, why is self-esteem important? To a large extent, it determines people's behavior. People's behavior is usually closely related to how they feel about themselves. For example, if you believe you can be successful at many things you try, chances are you will try more and more things and get better at doing them in the process. Self-esteem is one of the factors in increased motivation, involvement in learning, and successful performance in relationships and occupations. People who do not have positive feelings suffer from feelings of unworthiness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here again, children are given this equation. You really aren't going to be able to accomplish much unless you really like yourself and you feel really good about yourself. And therefore, you need to set up an ideal of who you want to be, and then you need to work toward that. And it's really super important that you feel good about yourself. So what we have now is like 2 generations of people that have been trying to feel good about themselves. And what we've got is suicidality on the rise, and we have depression on the rise, anxiety on the rise, panic attacks, all of these destructive results of a lot of things. Diet, lifestyle, there are other contributors, but definitely chasing self-esteem, constantly being focused on how we feel about ourselves is not the best way to live, not even a helpful way to live, but it was pushed as very, very vital. And so these kids were encouraged to take these self-assessments. And you would say either it describes me or it doesn't describe me. So this is an example of one. People generally like me. I am comfortable talking in class. I like to do new things. I give in very easily. I am a failure. I hate the way I look. I have trouble making up my mind, and so on and so forth. And then you can tally up your score. And if it's between certain numbers, then you know that you have a good self-esteem, or you have a medium self-esteem, or you have a low self-esteem. And so you need to work on that self-esteem. You'll accomplish things in life if you like yourself first. The whole mindset is you can't really get out there and do good, big, important things unless you like yourself first. And this is not actually based on any real reality. If you were and I were to study the lives of some of the greatest men and women that have done the most important things, we would find that they didn't really think super highly of themselves, or they just hadn't even thought about it enough that they could even tell you how they felt about themselves. How do we untangle this? How do we figure out how to work toward meaningful, worthwhile goals and outcomes? How do we be creators in the world, from creating a beautiful wall to creating a beautiful home, a beautiful marriage, whatever it is that we want to create? How do we go about creating it if feeling good about ourselves isn't the first step? And I know this is part of the reason why people go to therapy so much, because they think they're not accomplishing things in life because they don't feel really good about themselves. And what we have to do is parse that out. Our objective is not to feel good about ourselves. It's not to think that we are all this and all that, that we love trying new things and we're super adventurous and we love the way we look and we're super talkative and people really like us. You know, most people, when they're super honest, would not answer all those questions in the affirmative and say they really have really high self-esteem. So how are any of us going to function? How are we going to go about doing the worthwhile things that we want to do? We're going to discern reality objectively. Okay. We're going to do something super simple, and that is to be super honest with ourselves about what we really think of ourselves. And we're going to accept that that's how we feel about ourselves. One of the first steps in this process that takes us through is discerning between what we feel we deserve and what we desire. He says to this woman, okay, so what are some of the desires that you have? And, you know, by and large, most people desire good things. The things that are most dear to them are usually good things. They want a meaningful relationship with someone. They want to be a good neighbor. They want to take a really nice vacation, whatever it is that they want. They want to be a good parent. They want to be a good boss, whatever. But they may feel like they don't deserve those things. He says, think about if you were to win the lottery tomorrow. If you were to win the lottery tomorrow, would you take the money? Or would you say, no, I don't deserve it? Well, you would take the money, because what you want, what you desire, and what you deserve are not the same things. Because you are not your things. You are not your experiences. You are not your relationships. You're not any of those things. You're the observer of all of those things. You are separate from all of those things, and you're even separate from your desires. And whether or not you deserve them doesn't matter. It's not part of whether or not you desire them. You desire them anyway. When you really are honest about how you really feel about yourself, it sets you free to determine what you want to create. Okay, I'm going to read you a few things about this because I think in some of these things he says it better than I can. Okay. First of all, I want to read you this because he says he calls the self-esteem assessment psychological propaganda, and it misleads people in three ways. First, it suggests that self-esteem will determine your ability to live your life successfully. That is a lie. How you feel about yourself does not determine whether or not you're going to be successful or be able to pursue the things that you desire and obtain them. Second, if you have doubts about yourself or if you do not like your current life circumstances, it says you have low self-esteem. That's not the same thing. And third, it advises you to adopt their ideal of how a successful person is. A successful person is adventurous. A successful person likes to talk in class. A successful person likes the way that they look. It's just not true. So it distorts reality. In fact, he goes on to give a statistic about there was a standardized math test given to 13-year-olds in 6 countries. The Koreans came in first and the Americans came in last. But then they also asked the kids were shown the statement, I'm good at mathematics. Koreans came in last in this category, and the Americans were number 1. So the actual results on the test, in other words, what this study shows, along with a lot of others that we could show, and that is the fact that the students felt that they were good at math did not make them good at math. The fact that the Koreans didn't think that they were good at math didn't make them bad at math. Their feelings about their capacity to do it didn't influence whether or not they actually had the skill. They could do the math or not do the math. And pumping the Americans full of this idea that they ought to feel confident in math and then they would be good in math, there's just not a correlation. They're just not connected. Okay, so he says, if you begin to explore your own undesired beliefs, do not conduct it as a search and destroy mission. If you begin with the bias that it's not okay to hold undesired opinions, it will be hard for you to admit yourself what you might actually believe. You may or may not have undesired beliefs about yourself. If you ask yourself questions that lead you in the direction of an undesired belief, do not veer from your questioning because the answers are no longer consistent with an ideal you may want to uphold. Keep exploring what you truly think, even if you do not like your own opinions about yourself. Rather than attempting to talk yourself out of these beliefs, get to know them. Do not attempt to rid yourself of them because that would probably reinforce the belief you don't like. And at the end of the day, you will still believe what you believe. If you don't like your nose, is there anything anybody in the world can say that will make you like your nose? Probably not. And seeking forever to try to find the exact right phrasing or the exact person or the exact scenario that makes you love your nose is not going to change your belief about your nose. Some of the most successful people in the world have held undesired beliefs about themselves, but they were able to know what they believed and, independent of that, create what mattered to them. In order to create the life you want, a life that is worthy of your time and the precious few hours you have on planet Earth, you do not have to think you're all that. You do not even have to particularly think you're a super amazing person or particularly like yourself. The exploration I have done in the area of self-opinion and the creative process leads me to this conclusion. It doesn't matter what you think of yourself, and what you think of yourself will have no impact on your creative process. To truly be a creator, to create a relationship with God and your spouse and your children, to create a career, to create a beautiful home, to create a garden, whatever it is that you want to create, the environment, the life you want to surround yourself with, just doesn't have anything to do with how you think of yourself. It doesn't make you more or less likely to be able to obtain it and to be able to create it. You can think that you're the best at math and come in last. You can think that you're not very good at math and come in first. he goes on to talk about how if he had seen self-esteem helping people be creators, he would be in favor of it. But I haven't seen good results coming out of these practices. In fact, from my experiences of training tens of thousands of people in the creative process, I see the opposite. A focus on self-esteem can actually hold people back from being effective at creating what they want. Self-opinion hardly ever lives up to their ideals consequently, and here's the central point. A focus on self dominates their actions. Why does this not work? It doesn't work because it keeps us focused on ourselves and not on what we're creating. This is the simple principle that Jesus taught when he told us to lose ourselves in order to find ourselves. We don't need to be constantly hyper-focused on whether or not we think we're just all that. My oldest sister, her name's Sherdine Flint. I did a couple podcasts on her. She passed away 3 years ago. She was like a second mom to me. When she was in high school, she had acne terribly, and our family was really poor. And there weren't a lot of options. And so she had scars, acne scars all over her face. She never got really tall. She never felt, I mean, she would tell you, she never felt she was a beautiful woman. She didn't ever feel like she was particularly super smart. She didn't feel like she had a lot of specific talents. But when she passed away, she was the mayor of her town. And the entire town came out to grieve for her passing because she had taken her eye off herself and she had simply focused on other people. She took them on horseback. She just embraced what she loved. She loved animals. She loved horseback riding. She loved government. She loved reading. She loved video games. And as she embraced the things that she loved and allowed herself to enjoy them, she brought others in to enjoy them with her. And she forged these meaningful relationships with people who just absolutely adored her. Because when it's all about self-esteem and when you believe that how you feel about yourself is going to have a powerful impact on the life that you can create, you are so caught up in your own self-identity and thinking about yourself all the time that you stop your own progress. You recognize that you don't like certain things about yourself and you want to beat them out of yourself. And so you set up an ideal and you're just like Rudy Rudiger, constantly beating up against this thing that you're bad at instead of focusing on the thing that you're really good at. What I always tell people is, first of all, we have to admit that we don't always think super highly of ourselves. And that's okay. He says in the book over and over again, why do you have to think you're an amazing person? Why do you have to like yourself? Why do you have to, how does he ask it? He says, what is wrong with having an opinion that you are bad or unworthy or insignificant? What's wrong with that? It might be true. You might be insignificant. You're bad from the standpoint of being a Christian. You're a sinner. And so when you separate yourself from the things that are worth creating, when you recognize that you are not the creation, this is what we do. I say, okay, I want to create a painting. And then what's the first thing that we do? We self-assess. We ask ourselves, well, do I think I can create that? Do I think I'm a good painter? Do I think I'm up for the task? And here's the problem with that process. When we do that, we can never be right. If I want to create a painting I've never created before, and I ask myself if I can do it, the answer is always going to be no. The answer is no, because I've never done it yet. The only way I can do a self-assessment is based on the past. And if I'm trying to create something new that I've never created before, all I can do is look at the past and say, well, no, I've never done that before. So I guess I can't. What other conclusion can I draw? So I've stopped myself before I even attempted it. And it's kind of like saying that apple trees can only grow so big because there's this one apple tree that I saw one time and it was that big. I don't have any idea about the potential of apple trees. And I don't have any idea about the potential of me because I haven't attempted it yet, because I'm only judging my ability based on the past. And that's not helpful information. I can't know if I can do something unless I try to do it. And I can't do it if I'm caught up in how I feel about myself and my ability to do it. The only way I can do it is to recognize that creation as separate from me and not part of me and something that I'm going to go attempt to create. You know, my sister didn't marry until her 30s. And I remember she came to my home one day and she was like, I am ready to marry and have a family. And I want to create that, but I'm not sure how because I never have, because I've never dated a man until we were engaged and gotten married and had children. I don't know if it's possible for me. And I don't feel super beautiful and I don't feel super attractive to men. All these things and all this self-assessment that's going on. Where's my self-esteem at? You know, can I do this thing? And if she was going to create something that she'd never created before, if she was going to step into this space and find a way, she had to focus on what she was trying to create. Every time she did this self-assessment, she was going to hold herself back. She was going to keep herself in the past because she was going to try to judge her future accomplishments on her past instead of tapping her potential by trying to do more, to be more. And so instead of saying, well, God, I'm a pretty rude person. So what I need to do is set up an ideal of how I'm rude, and I need to affirm to myself every day, I'm a really kind, super patient, nice person, that reinforces in my mind that I would only be saying that to myself if I wasn't. And then go about my day trying to, every time I bump up against a situation, be like, oh, am I being rude now? And self-evaluating, all that kind of stuff. This is what I tell my students all the time. If you will lose yourself, if you will put aside the victim mode, the self-pity, and the self-esteem assessing, if you will put all that away and simply ask what is worthy to be created, and do what Fritz says, it may very well help you. Write out, take the time. These are all the things I don't like about myself. Great, good, now we know. I was very honest with myself that those are things I don't like about myself. And now I'm still going to get busy creating a happy marriage. I'm still going to get busy creating whatever, a healthier body, because that's something that's worth spending my time on. How did Michelangelo feel about himself? He didn't really like himself much. He didn't think a whole lot about himself. He had confidence as a painter as time went on, and he did more and more and more, but that grew over time. His confidence grew in his ability to create things, but he just went for it. You know, it's like, I don't even know if he ever asked himself the question. It didn't matter. What mattered was this beautiful thing he needed to create for the enrichment of all humanity. And so if you really struggle with this, if you really feel like your self-esteem is in the tank, then get really honest with yourself about what you don't like about yourself and then say, great, I know that now. I'm going to put that aside and figure out what is the next thing that's worth my time and effort. And I'm not going to ask myself, do I think I can do it? Because the answer is going to be no, because I've never done it before. So of course I don't think I can do it, but I'm going to try anyway. And I'm going to lose myself in the creation. I'm going to love the creation enough to bring it into being and know that it will enrich people's lives. And one other thing I was thinking about in conjunction with this, if you have an idea of something that you want to create, a business, whatever it is, you very well may have that desire for a reason. And you don't know whether you can do it until you've tried. And so if you will lose yourself in the creation, stop wondering and worrying about whether or not you think you can do it. Well, the only thing that matters is it worthwhile? So I think it's really important to remember that we cannot live up to our ideals about ourselves. So we should stop trying. And we should not be afraid of the thoughts and beliefs we have about ourselves because there's probably nothing anybody can do to change those thoughts and beliefs. But what we can do is service for the sake of that which is served. You know, for Karen Bates, it's orphans in Mexico. For someone else, it's their children. For me, it's this podcast. I create a podcast and I create a podcast. I go and I study things and they mean something to me and they help me in my life. And I want you to have the information too. And they're best when I'm thinking about you. If I sat and asked myself every day if I thought I could be a good podcaster and if I thought people would want to listen to me, I wouldn't podcast. And I have done that. I've done it plenty of times. Well, what's the point? No one cares. I'm not any good at it, blah, 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 blah. If I just think people need this information, people need to know that self-esteem is a lie. They need to know that it's holding them back. They need to know that they don't have to feel good about themselves in order to do something meaningful. They need to know that assessing whether or not they think they can do something is stopping them from creating and it's keeping them unhappy. You don't have to think you're all that in order to like the things that you create and enjoy the life that you build. I'm going to end with this last paragraph by Fritz because it's really powerful. Is it useful to discover what you think of yourself? Perhaps. Do you need to work on your opinion of yourself? No. Will you hold yourself back if you do not entirely like yourself? No. Is it wise to pursue self-esteem training or self-enhancement techniques? No. In fact, those practices may even work against you because they can drive your focus more and more inward. This makes it harder for you to create what you want to create. And since you are not your creations, what real difference does your self-opinion make in the creative process? None, since you are separate from your creations. So, with those words, I am so glad that you joined me today. I hope that you will tell me about your own experiences and your own self-esteem, self-assessment journey, and share stories in the comments about how you found yourself when you lost yourself. Focus on the service that you're rendering, focus on what you're creating, and what you think about yourself will just fall away and not matter at all. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.